there was a point where I left the guns and I was pulled by the British. So I had a really unique deployment where, of course, a lot of people work with different countries, but I was individually put as a separate person by myself with other people. And that was because I was in 2009, Americans, I think it wasn't up until 2015, women weren't doing those jobs yet as CST, cultural support teams. Right. And you guys didn't have those. So the British and the Americans would take the Canadian women and go drop them into units, and we would just be their CSTs. Now, my regiment was French. So I'm a Canadian person, but our country's second language is French. So for most people who don't understand that, when I got to my regiment, I was posted to an all French regiment. And for context, I did a couple of years of French in school. We do it when you're young, and I can say yes, no, toaster, but you want me to start pulling rounds down range and in panic situations start yelling in another language that I barely understood. I had 8 months to learn it. And the only way I had to learn it was just being immersed in it. There was no classes. There was no lessons. It was you're on parade and everyone turned and you're oh shit, that meant left. So it was a different experience once I went with the British. When I was at the FOB, there was a detachment of what we were landing rounds down on. I had the 101st guys at our FOB, and they would tell me all about it. And I became good friends with a lot of them. And, they were telling me a lot of stories from outside the wire and things like that. And I knew, we all know, we all hear about it, but to see it was a different ball game. So when I finally went with the British, that's where the rubber met the road. And I really saw what death and destruction and artillery, when you're underneath it, can do, and what small arms fire and serious IED shit could do.
And for the audience who's unfamiliar with CSTs, I spoke to Jack Scott, who actually introduced the two of us. Jax is awesome. CSTs, as you can talk about, they go on target. They're right there. So are you able to say what British unit you were attached to?
Yeah, so I was in a bit of a ship mix. There was a huge operation going on, unbeknownst to me. I was above my pay grade. I just got told I was going with these dudes. And it was a mix of, I had some of the Black Watch, I had the 3rd Scot Battalion of Scotland, and the British are mixed countries, right, in terms of how their military looks. So I served with Irish, English, Scottish. I served with South African, Fijian. So I had this really eclectic group of dudes around me, all under the British flag, and then me. So it was a really cool experience to be around these guys. They were as switched on as I've ever seen. They were quick. They knew what they were doing. And these dudes, a lot of them had done deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. This wasn't their first rodeo. So for me, it was a real comforting feeling, and they welcomed me right away. As soon as they saw that I could move the way they needed me to move, do what I'm told, do it effectively, and then hold my own in a situation, there was a different respect factor given. But it took a second for them to kind of see, okay, this is a 5 foot tall person who's carrying a 65, 70 pound pack. Are we gonna have to carry her? You could see the hesitation in people's faces when I got dropped off. And fair enough. I was barely at that time 19 years old. So, I get it. I understood their hesitation, but once I was able to kind of show up a little bit, they were good with it.
Did you like being that close to violence on target? Because I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a difference between firing artillery shells where you kind of know where they're landing, but you're not near where they're falling. And now you could be in a room with some guy with an AK who could just spray the whole doorway. You're standing right there.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do when I started, though, right? I wanted to be an infantry member. So when they said it, you get to leave the FOB instead of just working out and waiting for a fire mission, you get to go run and gun. That's what I wanted to do before I even joined the military. I wanted to be infantry. And the reason I wanted to be that was I come from a background of incredibly A-type personality, of a leadership role in sports, and from a competitive aspect of I knew how to hold my own, in my opinion, because I was a fighter. I knew from a physicality standpoint what I could achieve, but it's very unassuming, right? Because I'm so small, and I think at the time I was 102 pounds. So it was very unassuming for people in that standpoint, but I did know what I was capable of. I just wanted the opportunity to do that job.
And what point did you start struggling mentally where you're thinking to yourself, something's off, something's not right, I need to either speak to someone, something needs to happen? Because the the deck has been reshuffled?
That was when I witnessed my first IED explosion with people involved. When we had that operation happen, things just didn't go right from the get. It was all they kept telling me, the very quick briefing I got. So I got dropped off from the FOB. They picked me up. They were supposed to pick me up the day before. The Chinook were supposed to come get me the day before from the FOB, and it was taking rounds, so they had to turn around. And then my sergeant said, like, look, in a super French accent, like, look, if they can't come get you tomorrow, like, they're just going to take someone else. And then I got pissed off because now I'm ready to go. I want to go. I'm getting out of the FOB. I get to go do this job I was really stoked about. And so finally they came to get me the next day, and they were able to get me. And so we went to CAF, and I landed in CAF. And what they kind of told me was like, hey, you're on your own here. No one's here to tell you what to do. You don't have a leadership role in terms of like a chain of command. Yeah, you need something, you go to the British, but I was a no-hook gunner. Let me just state that. I was in the service for a year and a half before I was let out on my own in a war zone. Okay? So let's just get that completely out there. I was not trained properly for that job. Like, that's just the real of it. And people say, well, then why did you say no? I don't know if you've ever tried to tell your chain of command no, but that shit ain't gonna fly. My sergeant tried to tell his warrant officers and his master warrant officer she's not going. They're like, no, but she is. So he knew, being somebody who had served in Bosnia, who had served in Croatia, had done tours before, he knew right off the get, this is a fucking bad idea. This is a bad idea. And the only reason I, in my opinion, survived that was because my sergeant had taken so much time with our regiment before and done a ton of house clearing. So like, he knew if we had to move these guns and we had to go on the road with these 777s, they were massive targets, like $1 million a barrel level fucking, we don't want these to blow up targets. And that's why we move them in the air so much. But if we came into contact, we needed to know how to dismount. We need to know how to move and shoot. And if we had to go into compound, we need to know how to not get shot in the back. Like, that's just the truth of it. So Sergeant LeBlanc, he's now an officer. And so I try to not terrorize him about that. But it is, the reason I survived was because he took the extra time to be like, okay, we're going to go house clear. Okay, you know what? Yeah, you guys are good with your rifles, but I want you to be better. So we're going to go get level 4 clearance. We're going to go train, and we're going to get you guys certified in all these different levels of shoot and move and don't get shot. And when you go in the, left, right, up, down, like, communication was key. And so because of that, when I went with the Brits, I felt confident that I knew if I had to stack up on a door, I wasn't going to fuck it up. I wasn't going to go to someone and get or shoot them in the back. And I've had people ask me recently, being like, do you really think that you were that effective? Well, I didn't shoot anybody in the fucking back, and I didn't get shot in the back. So I don't think it was that bad. That being said, you can always be better. I'm not a special operator. I was taken away from my job, the thing I was trained for, and I did the best I could with what I had. So when I did stack up, I wasn't that stressed about it. I was to go in, and I wasn't supposed to shoot. I was supposed to go in, find those women and kids, grab them, and move them into another room as quickly as physically possible so that the rest of those places could be searched rapid fire. And then my job, while everyone was standing out there waiting for me, was to search like enormous amounts of women and kids by myself and just hope that it goes well.
Yeah, so, I can see how passionate you are looking back on the memories. When you see that IED blast involving people, did it have an impact on you immediately, or did it take a couple days?
No. It was fucking hot, fast. Like, it was like not good. We were sitting in a district, and we were in the Pandora district, we were on foot. And part of the problem and why people squawk about this is I was shuffled aggressively. So like, they told me, we won't need you. We don't use CSTs. Women and kids flee. The Brits were like, normally when we go in, there's none there. So we'll keep you backed up with the bomb dog or with the medic. Like, there's only a few of us, right? So if there's a medic, a bomb dog, and a CST, we don't go on the roofs and do sentry because there's only a few of us, right? So they keep us back unless they really need us. Then they pull us up to the front. And as soon as we landed, it was the middle of the night, and we were sitting in this wide open space, and we just waited there until morning prayer. So we were there for like 3 or 4 hours, just kind of wait out. And I love that we wait till their prayers are over before we kick them and kick the door in, because they don't fucking wait for us. So it was an ironic, I was like, what are we waiting for? They're like, morning prayer. I'm like, why? respect. I'm like, for why? Are we not at war right now? Like, what's happening? So we went and they got a call immediately. Immediately. They're like, oh, we need the CST up. And I was like, oh, I thought you guys like, I don't know, just go. So one dude would come get me and we would rock up to the front and they're like, they're all in the room. Go do your thing. And I remember the first compound I ever went into. I have photos of it because I was so dumbfounded because I had no clue. And all these women and kids are just sitting in this room, terrified of me, absolutely horrified. Like the worst feeling you could ever have as a parent is to see a stranger with a gun and a bunch of like grenades and ammunition walk in and be like, stand against a wall. I'm going to touch you now. Like, it's not a good vibe, man. Even when I think about it now, like makes me feel sick to my stomach. So we went through all that. And when the IED went off, I knew about IEDs. I knew what they were doing. I understood the damage they do. But I had never, like I said, I had never witnessed what it does to a human body. And then I had never witnessed having to do body collection. So it wasn't until that moment where when I felt the ground shake and I looked and whipped my head to the left and I saw what it does, the shock of that hit, and it was more of the confusion at that point. And then when all hell broke loose and one of the other guys came running out of the building and he had no kid on and I couldn't understand it. Like there was that moment of like, where's all his shit? It didn't compute that like the blast was so gnarly. It literally blew his helmet and the rest of his kit off and it twisted his fucking barrel of his rifle. Like I didn't put two and two together. I just saw blood. I saw a dude running and I was like, where's his shit? Like, because it just couldn't compute. And then when we were finally given the go ahead to go toward the compound, like the grape hut that had the IED in it, that's when I noticed things shift. You know, that thing that happens in movies that you see where if you were to put your hands over your ears and you're to breathe and you get the, and you're moving slow, like that real like mud movie, like slow down. That's what happened. And we jumped in, we got off the road because it hadn't been cleared. And we jumped into the ditch on the left-hand side and we started moving. And I think it was like a handful of us. And there was like two dudes, I can't remember, it's been so long. I think it was like 2 or 3 dudes in front of me and like 2 behind me, something along those lines. And we ran and we were just running along this ditch. It's like you couldn't get there fast enough. You couldn't move fast enough. You couldn't breathe properly. It just, my whole nervous system, now I understand what was happening. It just fucking kicked into hyperdrive, right? In a way that I'd never felt before. Once we got to the road and they're like, okay, we need to cross the ditch here. And we know now that they're watching, right? Because rounds are starting to come down. So they're like, okay, like 3, 2, 1. And we jump and we run into the grape hut. I had this surreal moment where I genuinely looked around and was like, where is he? Because like, I couldn't compute. My brain couldn't compute what I had just seen. It just couldn't rationalize. It was like error. I could feel it going like, something's wrong. And when one of the Brits came over, I believe it was Stephen Noble, he tapped me on the shoulder and he goes, are you good, Burns? Because my maiden name is Burns. And I whipped my head around and I was like, yeah, I'm good. Fucking not good. I call it the light switch moment where I felt my entire nervous system go, like a wall came down and was like, nope, that's not good. We can't handle that. And there's the wall. And then we started rapidly doing body collection as quick as possible because we started getting mortared and we started getting mortars down and then rounds started flying. And so we knew we didn't have a lot of time. So we started collecting what we could. One of the guys was laying down cover fire and one of the other guys came with, those green stretchers?
Yeah.
And we just started piling shit on top of just whatever we had, piling it, whatever we couldn't put on there, just put in pockets, right? Like just fucking nothing left behind. And it's funny because some people have come back, right? And been like, you weren't there for that. And I'm like, I have photos. Like I have real photos of these events. And I think that hurts more than being in the event.